I had always imagined that the day Daniel proposed would be the happiest day of my life. In many ways, it was. The elaborate setup, the romantic atmosphere, the look of love in his eyes, it all seemed perfect. Yet, as I stood there on that rooftop garden, fairy lights twinkling around us and the city skyline as our backdrop, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a question I wasn't ready to acknowledge. Daniel had orchestrated everything flawlessly. He had invited me to dinner at our favorite restaurant, the place where we had our first date 3 years ago. The meal was exquisite, the conversation flowing easily as it always did between us. When he suggested a walk to digest our food, I had no inkling of what was to come. As we strolled hand in hand through the city streets, Daniel led me to a building I had never noticed before. With a mischievous glint in his eye, he guided me into the elevator, pressing the button for the top floor. When the doors opened, I gasped. The rooftop had been transformed into a magical garden strewn with rose petals and candles. In the center stood a small table with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. Daniel poured the bubbly liquid, his hands steady despite the gravity of the moment. We toasted to us, to our love, to our future. And then, just as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Daniel dropped to one knee. His words were beautiful, a heartfelt declaration of love and commitment. He spoke of our journey together, of the challenges we had overcome, of the joy we had found in each other. As he pulled out the ring, a stunning diamond solitaire that caught the fading sunlight, I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "Pamela," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "will you marry me?" The word yes escaped my lips almost before he had finished asking. I threw my arms around him, overwhelmed by the moment, by the love I felt for this man who had planned such a perfect proposal. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I marveled at how it fit perfectly, how right it felt. We spent the next hour on that rooftop, sipping champagne and basking in the glow of our newly engaged status. We talked about the future, about the life we would build together. It was during this conversation that Daniel suggested we write our own vows for the wedding ceremony. "I want our wedding to be as unique and special as you are," he said, his eyes shining with sincerity. "Writing our own vows will make it so much more personal, don't you think?" I agreed enthusiastically, caught up in the romance of the moment. The idea of crafting our own promises to each other, of putting into words the depth of our love and commitment, seemed beautiful and meaningful. As we left the rooftop and made our way back to our apartment, my mind was already racing with ideas for my vows. I imagined pouring my heart out onto paper, creating a testament to our love that would move everyone to tears. It never occurred to me that this process might be anything other than a joyful affirmation of our relationship. That night, as I lay in bed next to Daniel, my new fiancé, I couldn't stop staring at the ring on my finger. It sparkled in the dim light, a tangible symbol of the promise we had made to each other. I fell asleep with a smile on my face, dreaming of the perfect wedding, the perfect vows, the perfect life we would have together. Little did I know that the journey of writing those vows would lead us down a path neither of us had anticipated. The small voice of doubt that I had pushed aside during the proposal would soon grow louder, forcing us to confront truths about ourselves and our relationship that we had been too afraid to face. But in that moment, blissfully unaware of the challenges that lay ahead, I was simply a woman in love, engaged to the man of her dreams, looking forward to a future that seemed bright and certain. The weeks following Daniel's proposal passed in a whirlwind of excitement and activity. We dove headfirst into wedding preparations, our evenings and weekends filled with venue visits, menu tastings, and endless discussions about color schemes and flower arrangements. Amidst the flurry of decisions, the task of writing our vows loomed large in my mind. a beacon of intimacy in the increasingly public spectacle our wedding was becoming. At first, I approached the vow writing with enthusiasm. I purchased a beautiful leather-bound journal, its pages crisp and inviting, ready to be filled with declarations of love and promises for our future. I imagined pouring my heart onto those pages, crafting words that would move not only Daniel but all our guests to tears. The romantic in me reveled in the idea of this personal touch to our ceremony. Daniel, too, seemed eager to begin. He spoke of wanting to capture the essence of our relationship, to put into words the depth of his feelings for me. We agreed to write our vows separately, wanting to surprise each other on the day. It seemed like a wonderful idea at the time, a way to make our wedding day even more special and meaningful. However, as days turned into weeks, I found myself struggling to put pen to paper. Each time I sat down to write, my mind would go blank. The words that flowed so easily in my daydreams seemed to evaporate when faced with the reality of the blank page before me. I began to question whether I truly knew what I wanted to promise Daniel, what our future together would look like. Meanwhile, the stress of wedding planning began to take its toll on our relationship. Small disagreements over trivial details, the shade of tablecloths, the choice of first dance song, began to feel more significant. I noticed Daniel becoming increasingly withdrawn when the topic of vows came up, his usual enthusiasm replaced by a look of discomfort and anxiety. One evening, as I sat at our dining table, staring at the still empty pages of my journal, I overheard Daniel on the phone with his best man. His voice was low, tinged with frustration as he confessed his own struggles with writing his vows. The realization that Daniel was facing similar difficulties should have been comforting, but instead, it sent a chill through me. If we both found it so challenging to express our feelings and commitments to each other, what did that say about our relationship? As the wedding date drew nearer, the pressure to complete our vows intensified. Family members and friends would inquire about our progress, their well-meaning questions serving only to heighten my anxiety. I began to have trouble sleeping, my mind racing with half-formed sentences and promises that felt hollow, even as I thought them. Daniel and I started to avoid the topic of vows altogether, focusing instead on the more tangible aspects of wedding planning. We threw ourselves into choosing playlists, finalizing seating arrangements, anything to distract from the growing unease we both felt but couldn't articulate. One night, as we lay in bed, the silence between us heavy with unspoken thoughts, I found myself questioning everything. The ring on my finger, once a source of joy and excitement, now felt like a weight, a commitment I wasn't sure I was ready to make. I thought back to the night of our engagement, to the certainty I had felt in that moment, and wondered how things had changed so drastically in such a short time. As I turned to look at Daniel, his back to me as he slept, I realized that the process of trying to write our vows had forced us to confront aspects of our relationship we had been ignoring. The blank pages of my journal weren't just a writing challenge. They were a mirror reflecting the uncertainties and doubts I had been pushing aside. With the wedding just weeks away, I knew we were approaching a crossroads. The vows we were struggling to write were more than just words for a ceremony. They were a testament to the foundation of our relationship, a foundation that was beginning to show cracks under the pressure of scrutiny. As I finally drifted off to sleep, my mind swirling with conflicting emotions, I couldn't shake the feeling that the journey of writing our vows was about to take us down a path neither of us had anticipated, one that would force us to confront truths about ourselves and our relationship that we might not be ready to face. As the deadline for finalizing our vows loomed closer, I found myself retreating more and more into solitude. The bustling city that had once energized me now felt overwhelming, and I sought refuge in quiet corners of our apartment or in long walks through less crowded neighborhoods. During these moments of isolation, I attempted to confront the growing unease that had taken root in my heart. With my journal in hand, I would sit for hours, pen poised above the paper, willing the words to come. But instead of flowery declarations of love, My mind wandered to moments of doubt and uncertainty that I had previously pushed aside. I recalled times when Daniel and I had disagreed on fundamental issues: our career paths, our views on starting a family, even our long-term goals. These differences, which we had always brushed off as minor, now loomed large in my mind. One particularly vivid memory surfaced repeatedly: a heated argument we had about relocating for Daniel's job opportunity. I had been excited about a potential promotion at my own company, but Daniel had expected me to prioritize his career over mine. We had eventually reached a compromise, but the underlying tension had never fully dissipated. Now, as I struggled to articulate my commitment to our future together, I wondered if we had truly resolved our conflicting ambitions or merely postponed the inevitable clash. Meanwhile, Daniel had become increasingly distant. I would often find him staring blankly at his laptop screen, the document for his vows open but untouched. When I asked about his progress, he would smile tightly and change the subject, his discomfort palpable. I began to notice how he would tense up whenever the topic of the wedding arose, his usual warmth replaced by a forced cheerfulness that didn't quite reach his eyes. As days passed, I found myself revisiting old dreams and aspirations that I had set aside for the sake of our relationship. The desire to travel extensively, to pursue further education, to take risks in my career. All these ambitions had been quietly shelved as Daniel and I settled into the comfortable routine of our life together. Now, faced with the task of committing my future to paper, I realized how much of myself I had compromised without even noticing. One evening, as I sat on our balcony watching the sunset, a thought struck me with unexpected force. I wasn't sure if I truly knew Daniel anymore. The man I had fallen in love with 3 years ago seemed different from the one who now moved silently through our shared space, weighed down by the same unspoken doubts that plagued me. Had we both changed so much? Or had we simply been too afraid to acknowledge the parts of ourselves that didn't perfectly align? The ring on my finger, once a source of joy and excitement, now felt heavy with expectation. I found myself twisting it absently, a nervous habit I had developed in recent weeks. Each rotation seemed to bring with it a new question, a new doubt about the path we were on. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, I made a decision. I would confront Daniel about our struggles with the vows. We needed to have an honest conversation about what was holding us back, about the fears and uncertainties that were clouding what should have been a joyous time in our lives. Yet, even as I resolved to speak with him, a part of me hesitated. Opening this door meant facing the possibility that our relationship might not be as strong as we had believed. It meant acknowledging that perhaps love alone wasn't enough to build a lifetime together. That night, as I lay awake listening to Daniel's steady breathing beside me, I felt a profound sense of loneliness. We were on the brink of making a lifelong commitment, yet I had never felt more distant from him. The vows we were struggling to write had become more than just words for a ceremony. They had become a mirror reflecting the true state of our relationship. As sleep finally claimed me, my dreams were filled with fragmented images, blank pages, fading sunsets, and a path that forked in 2 directions. In the morning, I knew we would have to face the truths we had been avoiding. The journey of writing our vows had led us to a crossroads, and the direction we chose would determine not just the words we would speak at the altar, but the very future of our life together. The morning after my night of restless dreams, I awoke with a sense of clarity that was both liberating and terrifying. As I went through the motions of my daily routine, my mind raced with newfound realizations about my relationship with Daniel and the life we had built together. I found myself scrutinizing every aspect of our shared existence, from the decor of our apartment to the routines we had fallen into. Each element seemed to whisper a truth I had been avoiding. I had compromised far more of myself than I had ever intended. The vibrant, ambitious woman I had once been felt like a distant memory, replaced by someone who had molded herself to fit the contours of Daniel's life. As I sipped my morning coffee, my gaze fell on the stack of bridal magazines on our coffee table. The smiling faces of perfectly posed couples now seemed to mock me, their promises of eternal bliss ringing hollow in the face of my growing doubts. I realized that in our rush to plan the perfect wedding, we had neglected to plan for the imperfect realities of a shared life. Throughout the day, memories of abandoned dreams and shelved ambitions flooded my mind. The international internship I had turned down to stay close to Daniel, the art classes I had stopped attending because they conflicted with his work schedule, the friendships I had let fade as I devoted more time to our relationship. Each recollection felt like a small betrayal of my former self. At work, I found myself unable to focus on my tasks. Instead, I caught myself daydreaming about the career path I might have taken had I not prioritized Daniel's job over my own aspirations. The promotion I had once been excited about now seemed like a consolation prize compared to the opportunities I had let slip away. As evening approached, the thought of returning home to Daniel filled me with a mixture of dread and guilt. I realized that I had been avoiding spending time alone with him, filling our evenings with wedding planning tasks and social engagements to escape the growing silence between us. The idea of facing him, of possibly voicing the doubts that had taken root in my heart, was almost unbearable. On my way home, I took a detour to a small park we used to frequent in the early days of our relationship. Sitting on a bench, watching couples and families enjoy the last rays of sunlight, I was struck by a painful realization. I couldn't remember the last time Daniel and I had done something spontaneous, something just for the joy of being together. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the grass, I found myself questioning every decision that had led me to this point. Had I said yes to Daniel's proposal because I truly wanted to spend my life with him, or because it seemed like the natural next step? Had we decided to write our own vows out of a genuine desire to express our love, or as an attempt to inject meaning into a commitment we were both unsure of? The weight of these questions pressed down on me as I finally made my way home. Entering our apartment, I was greeted by the sight of Daniel hunched over his laptop, his face a mask of concentration and frustration. In that moment, I recognized the same internal struggle I had been grappling with reflected in his furrowed brow and tense shoulders. As we moved silently around each other, preparing and eating dinner without any real conversation, the chasm between us felt wider than ever. The ring on my finger, once a symbol of promise and hope, now felt like a shackle, binding me to a future I was no longer certain I wanted. That night, lying awake in bed with Daniel's back turned to me, I made a decision. We needed to have an honest conversation about our relationship, about our individual hopes and fears, and about the doubts that were plaguing us both. The vows we were struggling to write had become more than just words for a ceremony. They had become a catalyst for confronting the hard truths about our relationship and ourselves. As I drifted off into an uneasy sleep, I knew that the coming days would bring difficult conversations and painful revelations. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. We could no longer continue pretending that everything was fine. The journey of writing our vows had forced us to look deep within ourselves, and what we had found there would inevitably change the course of our future together. The days that followed my internal revelation were marked by an escalating tension that permeated every aspect of our lives. The apartment that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed to close in around us, each room filled with the weight of unspoken words and avoided glances. Our attempts to continue with wedding preparations took on a frantic, almost desperate quality. We threw ourselves into discussions about floral arrangements and seating charts with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. Yet beneath the surface of these mundane decisions lurked a growing sense of unease, as if we were both aware that we were merely going through the motions. The task of writing our vows loomed over us like a dark cloud. My journal remained stubbornly blank, save for a few crossed-out lines and tear-stained pages. Each time I attempted to put my feelings into words, I found myself confronted with a barrage of doubts and uncertainties. The promises I wanted to make felt hollow, tainted by the realization that I wasn't sure if I could truly commit to them. Daniel's struggle was equally apparent. I would often find him staring at his computer screen, the cursor blinking accusingly on an empty document. The frustration radiating from him was palpable, his usual calm demeanor replaced by an edgy irritability that manifested in sharp comments and sudden outbursts over trivial matters. Our communication, once effortless and warm, had devolved into a series of terse exchanges and long, uncomfortable silences. Meals were eaten in front of the television, the background noise serving as a buffer against the need for conversation. Even our physical intimacy had waned, replaced by an awkward dance of avoidance as we moved around each other in our shared space. As the days wore on, the strain began to show in other areas of our lives. At work, I found myself making careless mistakes, my mind constantly preoccupied with the state of our relationship. Daniel started staying later at the office, citing project deadlines but unable to meet my eyes as he made his excuses. Our friends and family began to notice the change in our dynamic. Well-meaning inquiries about wedding plans were met with forced smiles and vague responses. I caught concerned glances exchanged between our parents during a particularly tense dinner, where Daniel and I barely spoke to each other. One evening, as I sat alone on our balcony, I overheard Daniel on the phone with his best man. The frustration in his voice was evident as he confided his struggles with writing his vows. The realization that he was facing the same challenges I was should have been comforting, but instead, it only deepened my sense of despair. If we both found it so difficult to articulate our commitment to each other, what did that say about the foundation of our relationship? The pressure of the impending wedding began to manifest physically. I developed insomnia, spending nights tossing and turning, my mind racing with all the things left unsaid between us. Daniel's stress showed in the dark circles under his eyes and the tension he carried in his shoulders. As we entered the final weeks before the wedding, the atmosphere in our home became almost unbearable. Every interaction felt charged with unspoken accusations and barely contained emotions. We began to avoid being alone together, filling our schedules with unnecessary errands and social engagements. The breaking point came during what should have been a simple task: addressing wedding invitations. A minor disagreement over the wording escalated quickly, years of pent-up frustrations and unresolved issues bubbling to the surface. Harsh words were exchanged, old wounds reopened, and for the first time, the possibility of calling off the wedding was voiced aloud. In the aftermath of that argument, as we retreated to separate corners of the apartment, the reality of our situation hit me with full force. The process of writing our vows had not just exposed the cracks in our relationship, it had widened them into chasms that seemed impossible to bridge. As I sat on the edge of our bed, twisting the engagement ring on my finger, I knew we had reached a crossroads. The fairy tale romance we had envisioned when Daniel proposed now seemed like a distant dream, replaced by the harsh reality of two people who had grown apart without realizing it. The next morning dawned with a sense of finality. We could no longer ignore the issues that had been brought to light. It was time for an honest conversation about our future, not just about the wedding, but about whether we truly had a future together at all. The vows we had struggled to write had become a mirror, reflecting truths about ourselves and our relationship that we could no longer avoid facing. The morning after our explosive argument, a heavy silence blanketed our apartment. The air felt thick with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. I awoke early, my mind racing with the realization that we could no longer avoid the conversation we had been dreading. As I moved through our shared space, every object seemed to hold a memory, a reminder of the life we had built together. The framed photos on the walls, once sources of joy, now felt like artifacts from a different time, featuring versions of ourselves we no longer recognized. Daniel emerged from the guest room where he had spent the night, his eyes bloodshot and his posture defeated. We exchanged wary glances, both aware that we stood on the precipice of a life-altering discussion. Without speaking, we gravitated towards the living room, the tension between us palpable. For what felt like hours, we sat in silence, the ticking of the clock on the wall marking the passage of time. I found myself studying Daniel's face, noting the lines of stress that had appeared in recent weeks, the way his shoulders hunched as if bearing an invisible weight. In his eyes, I saw a reflection of my own turmoil, a mix of fear, sadness, and resignation. When we finally began to speak, our words came out in a rush, years of unaddressed issues and buried resentments spilling forth. We talked about the dreams we had sacrificed, the compromises that had left us feeling diminished rather than strengthened. The topic of our wedding vows became a focal point, a symbol of all that was wrong in our relationship. I confessed my struggles with articulating promises for our future, admitting that I wasn't sure what that future looked like anymore. Daniel, in turn, revealed his own doubts and fears, his voice cracking as he spoke of feeling trapped by expectations, both his own and those of others. As we delved deeper into our individual perspectives, it became clear that we had been living parallel lives, going through the motions of a relationship without truly connecting. We had allowed external pressures and societal expectations to guide our path, losing sight of our authentic selves in the process. The conversation ebbed and flowed, at times heated and accusatory, at others quiet and introspective. Tears were shed, voices were raised, and moments of painful silence punctuated our exchange. Yet, beneath the hurt and anger, there was also a sense of relief. The relief that comes from finally confronting truths long buried. As the day wore on, we found ourselves exhausted, emotionally drained by the weight of our revelations. The realization that our relationship had been built on shaky foundations was devastating, but there was also a glimmer of something else. A bittersweet understanding that in facing these truths, we were finally being honest with ourselves and each other. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, mirroring the somber mood that had settled over us. We had laid bare our deepest fears and most painful truths, and now we faced the daunting task of deciding what came next. In the fading light, I looked down at the engagement ring on my finger. What had once felt like a promise of forever now seemed like a relic of a shared delusion. With trembling hands, I slipped it off, placing it on the coffee table between us. The soft clink of metal on glass echoed in the quiet room, a sound that felt both final and liberating. As night fell, we reached a mutual, unspoken understanding. The wedding, at least in its current form, could not proceed. We had embarked on the journey of writing our vows only to discover that the words we sought to express were not reflections of our true selves or our authentic desires. We parted ways that evening, retreating to separate rooms with the weight of our decision hanging over us. The future, which had seemed so certain just weeks ago, now stretched before us as an unknown landscape. Yet amidst the sadness and uncertainty, there was also a sense of possibility, the chance to rediscover ourselves as individuals before considering a shared path forward. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized that the process of trying to write our vows had ultimately led us to a truth we needed to face. It had forced us to confront the reality of our relationship, stripped of romantic notions and societal expectations. In failing to write promises for a shared future, we had inadvertently written the final chapter of our life together as we knew it. The road ahead was unclear, fraught with difficult decisions and painful conversations. But as I drifted into an uneasy sleep, I felt a glimmer of hope, not for the fairy tale ending we had once envisioned, but for the chance to build lives true to ourselves, whatever form that might take. The days following our confrontation unfolded in a haze of subdued activity and emotional exhaustion. The apartment, once our shared haven, now felt like a battleground of memories and shattered dreams. We moved around each other like ghosts, our interactions limited to necessary exchanges about practical matters. I threw myself into the task of unraveling our wedding plans. Each phone call to cancel a reservation or inform a vendor felt like another nail in the coffin of our relationship. Hatgi. The sympathy in their voices, the awkward pauses when I explained the situation, only served to underscore the finality of our decision. Daniel took charge of informing our families and closest friends. I overheard snippets of his conversations, his voice strained as he repeated the news over and over. The shock and disappointment from our loved ones added another layer of guilt to the complex emotions swirling within me. As word spread, our phones buzzed constantly with messages of concern and offers of support. Well-meaning friends tried to intervene, suggesting counseling or time apart to reconsider. Their efforts, while appreciated, felt like attempts to close a door that had already swung wide open, revealing a truth we could no longer ignore. In the midst of this emotional turmoil, we began the painful process of disentangling our lives. What had once seemed like a seamless merging of two individuals now revealed itself as a complex web of shared possessions, intertwined finances, and mutual obligations. Each decision about who would keep what felt like another small ending. I found myself spending long hours at the office, throwing myself into work as a distraction from the emptiness that awaited me at home. The familiar routine of my job provided a semblance of normalcy, a stark contrast to the upheaval in my personal life. Colleagues cast concerned glances my way, but I deflected their questions with forced smiles and vague reassurances. Daniel, too, seemed to be seeking refuge in his work. He started coming home later and later, his absence a palpable presence in the apartment. On the rare occasions when we were both home, the silence between us was deafening, filled with unspoken regrets and lingering questions. As the days turned into weeks, I began to experience moments of unexpected relief amidst the sadness. The pressure to be one half of a perfect couple had lifted, allowing me to reconnect with parts of myself I had neglected. I rediscovered old hobbies, reached out to friends I had lost touch with, and started to envision a future shaped by my own desires and ambitions. One evening, as I sorted through a box of mementos from our relationship, I came across the journal I had bought to write my vows. Its pages remained blank, save for a few crossed-out lines and tear-stained corners. In a moment of clarity, I realized that the empty pages were not a failure, but a sign. They represented the honesty we had finally achieved, the courage to admit that we couldn't make promises we weren't sure we could keep. The process of separating our lives continued, each day bringing new challenges and unexpected emotions. There were moments of bitter argument over seemingly trivial matters, followed by periods of melancholic reminiscence about happier times. Through it all, a new understanding began to emerge between us. A recognition that while our paths were diverging, the journey we had shared had shaped us both in indelible ways. As the date that would have been our wedding day approached, I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Sadness for the future we had imagined, relief at avoiding a commitment we weren't ready for, and a growing sense of anticipation for the unknown path ahead. On that day, instead of walking down the aisle, I found myself sitting alone in a park, watching couples and families enjoy the summer afternoon. The engagement ring, which I had kept in a drawer since our confrontation, weighed heavily in my pocket. In a moment of quiet ceremony, I approached a small bridge over a stream, and after a moment's hesitation, let the ring slip from my fingers into the flowing water below. As I watched the ripples fade, I felt a sense of closure washing over me. The journey of trying to right our vows had led us not to a lifetime together, but to a profound truth about ourselves and our relationship. In failing to find the words to promise forever, we had found the courage to be honest about our present. Walking away from the bridge, I felt lighter, unburdened by expectations and pretenses. The future stretched before me, uncertain but full of possibility. The blank pages of my life, like those of the journal I never filled, waited to be written, not with promises I couldn't keep, but with authentic experiences and genuine growth. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, I realized that the end of our engagement was not just an ending, but also a beginning. It was the start of a new chapter, one in which I would write my own story, guided by my own truths and aspirations. A year had passed since the day that would have been our wedding. The seasons had changed, bringing with them a gradual healing and transformation. As I stood in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes yet to be unpacked, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. The process of rebuilding my life as an individual had been challenging, filled with moments of doubt and loneliness. Yet with each passing day, I found myself growing stronger, more confident in my decisions, and more attuned to my own needs and desires. My career had taken an unexpected turn. The promotion I had once seen as a consolation prize became a stepping stone to new opportunities. I had taken risks, pursued projects that ignited my passion, and found a sense of fulfillment in my work that I hadn't experienced in years. Relationships with friends and family, once strained by the aftermath of our broken engagement, had evolved. Some bonds grew stronger, deepened by the support they offered during my darkest moments. Others faded, making way for new connections that aligned more closely with the person I was becoming. I had rediscovered old passions and cultivated new ones. The art classes I had abandoned years ago became a source of joy and self-expression. I traveled, not to escape, but to explore and grow. Each new experience felt like a brushstroke on the canvas of my life, creating a picture uniquely my own. As I unpacked a box of books, I came across the journal I had intended to use for my vows. Its blank pages no longer felt like a symbol of failure, but rather a testament to honesty and self-awareness. In a moment of inspiration, I opened it to the first page and began to write, not promises to another, but affirmations to myself. News of Daniel had reached me sporadically through mutual friends. He too had embarked on a journey of self-discovery. While part of me would always care for him, I felt no regret about the path we had chosen. Our decision to part ways had allowed us both to grow in ways we couldn't have imagined. As evening fell, I took a break from unpacking to stand on the balcony of my new home. The city stretched out before me, a landscape of possibilities. I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, struggling to write vows for a future she wasn't sure she wanted. The contrast with who I had become was stark and empowering. The journey of trying to write those wedding vows had led me not to a lifetime commitment to another, but to a profound commitment to myself. In failing to find the words to promise forever to Daniel, I had found the courage to promise myself authenticity, growth, and self-love. As I watched the sunset, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, I felt a surge of excitement for the future. The blank pages of my life stretched out before me, waiting to be filled with experiences, challenges, and triumphs. I was no longer bound by expectations or compromises that dimmed my spirit. In that moment, standing on the threshold of my new life, I made a vow, not to a partner, but to myself. I vowed to live authentically, to pursue my passions without fear, to love deeply but not at the expense of my own growth. I promised to embrace the uncertainty of life, to learn from my mistakes, and to celebrate my successes. As night fell and the city lights began to twinkle, I turned back to my apartment, ready to continue unpacking and settling into my new space. The journey ahead was uncertain, but I faced it with a sense of anticipation and joy. The story of my life was mine to write, and I held the pen firmly in my hand. The blank journal, once a source of anxiety, now sat on my desk as a reminder of the power of honesty and self-reflection. Its pages waited to be filled, not with promises I couldn't keep, but with the true story of my life as it unfolded. As I drifted off to sleep that night, in a home that was entirely my own, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The end of my engagement had not been an ending at all, but the beginning of a journey towards self-discovery and genuine happiness. The vows I had struggled to write had ultimately led me to the most important promise of all, the promise to be true to myself.
Hey there, Unraveling Ties family. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. I hope it touched your heart, made you think, or even inspired you in some way. We would love to hear your thoughts and feelings about this story. Don't be shy. Leave a comment below and share your perspective with our community. Your voice matters to us. If you enjoyed today's story and want to be a part of our journey as we unravel the complexities of human relationships, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss a new story. We're always eager to explore new angles and dive into the themes that resonate with you the most. So tell us, what kind of stories would you like to see in upcoming episodes? Your input helps us create content that you'll love. And hey, if today's story reminded you of a personal experience or a tale you'd like to share, we're all ears. Feel free to share your own stories in the comments. Who knows, your story might even inspire a future Unraveling Ties episode. Once again, thank you for being a part of the Unraveling Ties family. Your support means the world to us. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Until next time, keep embracing the ties that bind us and never stop exploring the depths of the human heart. See you in the next video.